Oh, welcome back to the podcast. I pressed record too soon, but here we go. This podcast, usually we're talking about cultures and different theories about different religions and spiritual beliefs and spirituality and religion topics and some mental health topics wound up in there. So one of the things I've been studying lately is a topic that always has interested me. So today we're going to talk about that. It's this topic of I want to call it how would I word this? Branding and symbolism. I guess maybe that's the easiest way to put it. Branding and symbolism of spiritual or religious symbols, of any kind of spiritual or religious or practice of, worship or idol worship. There's so many symbols out there, and this this topic is kind of inspired by this this person. I don't recall his last name. His first name is Scott, and I used to go to a church where he went. He was there. I believe I was already there first, but he was of the same, denomination of Adventism, and he was a part of the same church where I was attending at a time. And he basically made this kind of a documentary / present. It was like a presentation almost. It's called Battlefield Hollywood, and I know the first one is on YouTube. I think it's about 48 minutes long. You can just look it up. I think it's a 2-part series, if not longer. The second part, I think, so basically he talks a lot about movies, and he talks about videos, movies, Academy Awards, the Emmys. So he starts out with talking about award shows, idols, even the concept and topic of like idols, how people consider like a lot of people in entertainment to be idols. And then he kind of goes further into this idea of the idols, and he, like, in the other part that I haven't finished watching recently, but I've watched it before. I saw it live, I think. Did I see it live? Now I can't recall if I've seen it live or if he did a presentation for us live, or if we watched a presentation of his as a group before. But that's how I was exposed to this, was when I was going to one of these churches already. And he was basically, this is in LA. It's not uncommon to have people that you come across that were trying to get into the biz, that are trying to get, into acting and on the big screen and or on a show or just anywhere on TV. I know plenty of people who have had even like small casting roles. I used to be in a collegiate group with a young woman who was, she went into, I believe, graphic design and did some graphic design for one of those like Kleenex commercials. It was like, it's an old commercial. I just remember that they looked like they were like, it was like a 3D modeled Kleenex type commercial. I don't know if it was Kleenex the brand or if it was like another type of tissue. I had another friend who worked for Blizzard, I've had multiple friends work for, video game companies and things like that. I've had a lot of friends work for movies, as in like the modeling in the movies. Not models, like actual models, like taking pictures of a physical person as a model. Not so many of those, but some that are that. But I'm talking more like the people who are models, like the people who were doing like 3D modeling, like they would make like the characters on the computer, and it would be like characters in either a video game or like some aspect of like the video game or like a movie or a show. They were definitely involved. I've known people who acted in commercials. That's a lot more common. Some people who acted on some shows. I knew some people who went on to those types of like those live screen like dancing type shows or like singing type shows, not necessarily like American Idol or Dancing with the Stars, but like other shows like that. I knew a guy that was a music producer that at one point worked with Tupac, and he was a sound engineer, a music engineer. He worked with Tupac, he worked with a bunch of other people. I knew a lot of people in these types of fields. I knew, when I went to church actually in Hollywood, I knew a lot of people that were, doing like a lot of screen directing. A whole lot of people I know that wrote and directed for small projects or were into film and all kinds of stuff. So it's not uncommon that, in LA you come across people that are actors or whatever. Like they're not always like major actors, but you can look them up like on IMDb, and they have like profile, and like they've worked on certain projects and stuff. But I don't know if I know that many big name people. I think I've only known a couple people that were a little bit big in sports, but I'm talking like people I went to like junior high school with. Like this is like ages ago. So yeah. Like, I know this one African guy who, I don't remember where he ended up playing professionally. I think he went overseas to play basketball. And then I knew a lady, her name was Ebony. I went to school with her. She became a professional basketball player. I don't know if she officially was in the WNBA. But just a lot of people with, talent that really aspire to, like, do their craft. And so it's not uncommon, out here, and it was just interesting that the guy, was this guy. I can't recall if he became a pastor or was a pastor or was studying to be a pastor or he was just allowed to talk about his experiences. So he was an actor at a certain point too, way before I met him, and way before I met him through this church. And he came to church and he gave this presentation about, all those things I just mentioned, as well as, he started breaking it down. Like that was kind of the background he gives. And the main purpose that he was trying to talk about was that people are being exposed to a lot of symbolism that they don't really realize is from other demonic type of things. And so that was his main concern, was that in Hollywood there is a lot of I guess you would say he said that there are a lot of demonic forces that are very much ingrained in Hollywood, that actors themselves speak on, very popular, prominent actors speak on, of like channeling demonic forces and all this kind of stuff. And so that kind of makes us have to take a step back, right? Because not everybody believes in demons and angels and aliens and God and all these types of things. And so if you already don't believe in that, I wonder what this kind of a topic sounds like. But if you do believe in, God and the Bible, usually when you believe in God and the Bible, there's usually this other side of like, this idea of right and wrong, and that there's stuff that is usually considered more towards what God would prefer, right? And then more towards what God would not prefer, right? And every denomination, every individual person, it has their convictions and beliefs and traditions about like what to do, what not to do, right? But I think overall, the general consensus in Christianity and in, a lot of monotheistic religions, especially the ones that are considered like Abrahamic type of religions, like Judaism, Christianity, Islam, usually you're not going to be told to worship something that's not God. Usually you're not going to worship that. At the very least, regardless of what you believe, in your denomination, usually you're going to stray away from worshiping some other deity or some other idol or some other thing, right? And so his main premise is that people who are very either involved in Hollywood, as in trying to act in all these types of things, trying to get into Hollywood, into showbiz, into the scene where you're actually a performer, you're usually forced to make a choice between God, and keeping your own worship between you and God, or being, kind of forced into like a form of idol worship, calling on demonic spirits, and involving yourself with all types of rituals that aren't really centered around God or the Bible, but it actually is actively talking against the Bible, but it's being done in such a manipulative, tricky way that the person who's trying to act themselves might not really know, or they know and they get to a point where they actually legitimately know what they're doing, but because they want the fame, because they want the glory, because they want the money, they get blinded by the direction they were trying to go, and they get really sucked into this culture of like hatred of religion, hatred of God, hatred of the Bible, mocking of Christianity and the Bible and religion, twisting things around and showing them in a way that appeals to the population for entertainment purposes, but also that the masses, the population, isn't really aware that they are participating in this. People aren't really aware of this. All right, so those of you who know me know that I'm, I have an interest in certain topics like propaganda and manipulation and things like that, from a psychological standpoint, usually. And mostly, I have an interest in this dynamic between people in power positions who abuse their power. They get to a point where they're able to manipulate intelligent people, even to a point where they're able to manipulate masses of people. And people don't really see it coming. And I'm not interested in myself doing that. I couldn't really see myself ever doing something like that. But something that I am interested in is just that as, a form of abuse. Not because I would ever want to do it, but because it does seem to be such a common form of abuse. And it's such a common experience that I've noticed happens, that people get, intelligent people, get duped and tricked into doing things or saying things or straying away from their own values to a point that they never thought they would get. And it's not like it's usually an overnight process. Usually it's like a small, slow process of slowly brainwashing people. And that's kind of what interests me, is the brainwash ability of the human mind. And I am not interested in brainwashing people, but I do find the topic to be fascinating. I find it sad too, but I find it to be fascinating when we start talking about philosophies of like good and evil. There are often leaders throughout history. I'm talking like Hitler. Like, there are leaders that often will manipulate to a point that people start believing in these things, almost like they're a deity. They believe in it, right? And so that is kind of another thing that this guy was talking about, kind of that people are being brainwashed out of their Abrahamic religious monotheistic belief in God to follow idols and demon type of worship practices. Now, mostly when you talk about like Abrahamic religions, you're not worshiping idols. I myself have a I find it tricky, because I'm very open-minded. And so I know there are a lot of religions that have multiple gods, a lot of religions that have multiple idols, and they worship these multiple gods and they worship these multiple idols. And who am I to say that they shouldn't do that? Like, I don't really know, I can't say Christianity or Judaism or Islam is more correct, because they're Abrahamic monotheistic religions and these other ones are less correct. Something that interests me is that there are religions that are older than these religions. And so that's something that's interesting to me. Like, I always like to go to like the source, like the main, like initial source, right? And so when you even think of like what was the first religion wasn't these Abrahamic religions. The first religion, according to history, is supposedly Hinduism, is one of the older religions. And Hinduism being an older religion, it's interesting that people would go out from that religion and eventually come into Judaism, which came before Christianity and before Islam. And so a religion, involving this, God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob was not the first belief system that people were having. That was relatively newer, even though it's not new, but newer, like 6,000 years old at this point, but newer than that. So I found it very interesting that, I'm not trying to make this into like a whole, like, hatred speech against people who do believe in idols and worship idols, or who might be pagans and, do pagan worship, or who might be, Hindu or Buddhist or any other type of religion, or if you have a religion where you believe that there are multiple gods. I'm not here to tell you don't do that. I'm talking more so about the manipulation of the entertainment industry. into getting people who actively are trying not to worship these other, like any other deity, and trying not to be involved with idols, and how it is that, according to this guy, Hollywood has created an entire entertainment industry that's worldwide, that has people worshiping technically, or learning about, or like it appeals to their attention that there are these gods, and there are these just hidden, it's kind of like hidden messages that aren't very overt. But the more you learn about these other gods, these other deities, these other, like, the history of deities. For example, there's a deity, I'm not very well versed on this and I'm still learning about it, but there's this deity called Dagon. There's some question, this isn't even related to this topic really, but well, in a way it is, but not really. There's this question that, Dagon was worshipped by the Philistines, and Dagon was an idol, had idol like depictions of it that was worshipped, and was a god that had a head that was shaped like a fish, and a body, like the upper torso was like human, and it has like different watches that it wears, or like a sundial watch, and like another like symbolism type of things, and then like a lower fin, and people have some kind of suspicion of like the rituals and things like that maybe like the Pope does, saying that the headdress that the Pope wears is related to this Dagon fish head symbolism that you see throughout Christianity, even though it's not a Christian God, because there's supposedly one Christian God. There's not others. There's not a fish god in Christianity, but that Christianity does uphold a lot of worship of this fish, that other cultures were worshiping at the time, when, like, before Christianity, but like Judaism, that somehow that became what Christianity is worship of Dagon and not worship of God. And there's a lot of symbolism pointing towards that concept, right? And the more you kind of look into it, it becomes more and more complex and tricky. But it's stuff like that, like the manipulation of these ideas, that, the general population, the general people might not really know, right? And it's kind of like, well, if you don't know, are you really held accountable for that? But it's just like people being tricked into worshiping something different, thinking that they're worshiping one way, and then they're actually worshiping something else in disguise. And so if you take that to what this guy's saying about like Hollywood and movies, I'll do something more specific on it, but just in general with this episode, the topics he touched on were like early topics like Denzel Washington, Marilyn Monroe, popular names like that, multiple people, Lucille Ball. I think those were the three most popular ones he kind of spoke about, where he was like reading through interviews that they have talked about or had talked about, in their lifetime. Like, how did they go from step A of wanting to act and be popular and famous and on the big screen, and how did they become such popular actors, that we pretty much all know. I Love Lucy, almost all of us know Denzel Washington, almost all of us know Marilyn Monroe. These are popular names, even if you've never seen anything with any of them in it, which is rare in American society. But even if if you actively watch stuff and you've never seen them in anything, that would be, I don't know, like, you maybe don't watch that much stuff. But if you watch a lot of stuff, you've probably come across something within your lifetime, regardless of what age you are. They span, like, people still watch I Love Lucy. I mean, it's black and white and it's not even modern, and people still watch it, right? So things like that. And they said that the way that they all kind of talked about this, and this isn't only them, there are multiple people that talk about, like, conjuring a muse and, doing some kind of like a seance type of ritual to kind of like get it into another spirit, or get into another like kind of mindset, or like have some kind of a spirit enter themselves, and then they change their personality while they're acting. They kind of conjure up this spirit and take on what it allows them to do when they act. Like, they can do it with the aid of this type of a spirit. None of them said necessarily that they prayed to God. They mentioned some other, they didn't name it. There wasn't like a name of like a deity, or a name of a god, or a name of a spirit that they talked about, but they all kind of like seemed to, enter a type of a state that, something came into them to help them be able to do that acting so powerfully that, they're still very, very popular and very, very, strong actors. And people say, well, what difference does that make, like, in my life, if I'm just watching someone who gets possessed on their own and decides to come out here and act, and I'm just watching the movie, right? It's like this guy's mentioning that it is basically that process that leads these people to act in these movies and shows that is so strong and so powerful that those of us who were viewers and watching it get confused about our own values and morals, because we're being enticed to watch the messages that are being presented to us through these movies and stuff. So that's one thing that he mentions. And these aren't the only 3 actors that say this. There are a lot of musicians who say the same thing, that, they kind of call on some kind of a something that leads them to be able to do what they do so well, to get people's attention, to grab people's attention. So people who don't know a lot about Adventism probably don't know the relationship between movies on the big screen, as well as television things, movies, television, and the spiritual practices of that religion. Just to explain it real quick, a lot of people are taught, at a young age, if you're Adventist, don't go to the movies. I mean, they're full on like articles and books and book chapters and things written about not going to movies. Because, I mean, there's kind of like this saying that they say, like, your guardian angel's gonna like stay outside the theater. I mean, I don't even know what, if you think about guardian angels and you think about angels in general, like, what are angels? Like, they're not like, floating around with like robes and harps and things like that. Like, they're a different type of a being. They don't all look like human beings like that, and they're not like a cute little cupid kind of thing on your shoulder. Like, they're an actual different kind of a being that supposedly people have a guardian angel. I don't even know. I'm just saying this is the tradition that's kind of taught about. Like, don't go into those movie theaters. You're not going to be protected there, and it opens up your mind to so many things because it manipulates you. And for people who don't believe in Hollywood entertainment manipulation, I would just say pay attention to basic TV commercials. That's all you have to do. That's all you have to do is study and learn about commercials, about branding, about how people brand, how people advertise. Advertising, branding, shelving of a brand. Just those topics alone are a form of appealing to the automatic senses that humans have, appealing to either entice you to want it or appealing to something of your age range. Little children like multiple colors and things, and so of course all their items are going to be a certain color. They're going to be like multiple colors and stuff. You don't usually have pastel and like drab color items for babies. Usually they're like pink and purple and green and red and like all these kind of colors, right? Say if I were gonna go buy a guitar amp or something, like if I were a little kid, I would probably want something that was way more colorful than just like a black and gray guitar amp. I would be way more likely to go towards the one that looked way more appealing, that would appeal to my senses more. And people know this. Advertisers know the human mind very well, right? And that's only commercials. Advertising for a few seconds to get you to kind of pay close attention. Anything that gets an emotional pull, whether that's hyped up, energetic, like pump up the music, or the opposite. Something I've seen way more often lately is commercials about different types of medicines. If you notice how they even make you feel, I can't even watch that stuff. Or the ones that make you want to, pay for the, starving children, or the ones that make you, give money to animal shelters. They tug on your emotions and they make you sad. They're like, oh man, I feel so down all of a sudden. The news does that too. It gets you kind of angry and excited and scared. It pulls on an emotion that makes you kind of like, once you get in an emotional state of a certain way, you don't think the same way that you were thinking beforehand. You're not thinking the same way if you're suddenly sad because, everyone in this commercial is dragging and they look so depressed and down and the music is so low and there's no lively colors. It's just like people just slow with their heads drooped down and crying and can't get out of bed and all this kind of stuff. And then you see them take they show a little bit of this medicine, bottle or something, and people taking this medicine or giving themselves a certain injection of a kind, and all of a sudden they're happy. The colors even change. They're running in the park and running laps and walking a dog and playing with their kids and eating at a picnic versus before they couldn't even get out of bed. It kind of tugs at your emotions. And if you are feeling that way or have those feelings, you might start thinking, hey, I might need this medicine. Something you never thought to use or never knew even existed before, right? So it exposes you to the product, and it also gives an emotional pull to where you kind of believe what they're trying to give you with the messages. You don't even have to listen too much to all of it, but it pulls on a lot of your senses, as well as emotions. It gets you emotionally, sensory, with like what you're hearing, what you're seeing in particular, and with maybe like memories and emotion, right? If it's a toy or if it's a trip or something, you're not going to see people looking sad playing with the toy, or people looking, sad going on this cruise. They're excited. They have friends that are with them. They're meeting new people. They're having this exciting experience that, like, of course I want to pay my money to go do this, right? So even simple, like, advertising on a television, we all know that a lot of the things that we purchase are because we know it exists from the commercial, and then, it makes you want to buy it. A lot of people, when they get a new car, they want it because they saw it on television. If you've never seen that thing on the road and never knew it even existed, you would never want it. And that's one reason why I hadn't really been watching TV hardly at all for, like, most of my life. Once I started studying psychology, it was hard for me to really care about television, because I realized what they were doing was, they're basically just trying to get you to a point. Oh my gosh, with these sirens. They're just trying to get you to a point where you're following what they want you to do. And you end up spending your money and time and energy in places where you wouldn't naturally have gone to go do that. You only knew about it because it was advertised towards you. And so if you really want to save money, just don't watch TV. You won't know what exists, and you won't buy it unless you go shopping all the time, and then you'll see it there. But being able to think for yourself isn't something that a lot of these advertisers want you to do. They don't want you to do any kind of deductive, logical thinking and reasoning and critical thinking. They want you to just go by your emotion and senses within those few seconds and want it. We can't even get away from advertisements at this point. It's like somebody sent me this thing on, like, I think Instagram the other day or something, where it was like this poor guy is like only 15 seconds of freedom in his busy day or something, and he's at the gas pump, and there's like this freaking like advertisement on the little monitor there, and it's like, isn't that the truth? Like, you go in an airport, you can't even have peace. There's news blasting everywhere. You go in the gym, there's news playing everywhere. You go to, the gas station, there's news everywhere. You go into almost any lobby, there's something on the screen somewhere. It's hard to get away from it. Even if you're watching YouTube, there's advertisements there. I put advertisements in these episodes. There's advertisements there. But, people are advertising, to try to get the money from it. That's one thing. You get the money from advertising. Another thing, because these companies pay out for people participating in buying their services, right? So they give you a portion of, what they earn by you spreading the word about their product or their service or their brand. And so it's like a hamster wheel. But that's only when we're talking about advertising, when we're talking about it's only when we're talking about advertising, just to like commercials. So regardless of what you believe about movies and television being kind of like used to kind of like play to people's emotions and things, and kind of like play to helping people to think in a certain way and like alter their values in a certain way, people don't necessarily think about it. They think of it like, oh, this is going to be entertaining. I'm going to have an entertaining experience that's more fun than not having this, or that I want to put into my schedule to be able to have entertainment during this time period. Because entertainment is exciting. Boredom is not exciting. Not doing something valuable is not exciting. And the interesting thing about entertainment is a lot of times it can be relaxing. So there's the reward and the relaxation. There's the reward in seeing some new concept and creative idea. People love stories. Even before television, people would sit around a fire and tell stories. and like ask for elders to tell stories about their lives. Like, tell me the story again. Tell me the story about when you caught your first, whatever, when you caught your first fish. Tell me a story about when you got married. How did you guys meet? Like, tell me the story. People always want to hear stories. It seems to be like a natural thing that humans love stories. They love to be told stories. And most shows and movies do just that. They tell a story, a fictional story even. Or even one that's based on reality or something, but, it's a reenactment at the least. So just putting all that together, just knowing that it's in commercials and on store shelves and things like that, what would make somebody think that all of the entertainment industry, for the most part, that's going through Hollywood is, promoting this kind of idea of like manipulation of emotion, manipulation of, what you want to think about, what you want to purchase, how you want to feel. So he goes into talking about, like, after these people are talking about conjuring up, like, muses and, like, spirits and things. Alright, so he starts to talk about these examples, starting with symbolism, and he starts looking at just a general, like, who was it? I think it was like Stephen Colbert. I was just looking at this and I can't remember. Jon Stewart and Stephen Colbert, maybe. They had a, how they have those teleprompters, and it was one of the years when they were, at the Emmys doing the, they had like a little skit at the Emmys, like, to talk about the nominees, and their skit was basically like this kind of play on the Emmys and Idols. Like, they were saying things with certain wording along the lines of like jokes that were like, like one of them was saying one thing and then the other one was pretending to translate it, right? So one of them said something like an introduction, like hello or good evening or something like that, and the other one said like good evening, godless sodomites, and then they keep going on talking about like what it says on the teleprompter. Like, one of them says something along the lines of he's just like talking, reading the teleprompter, and then the other guy says, as his interpretation of it, his playful interpretation of like, how these shows or movies are designed to, warp the minds of the young and things like that. And then this other, towards the end, when he's saying like, wrapping up the, what's on the teleprompter, the other guy says, bow down to your God, or something like something like that. And it was like a joke between, like, they were both like, one of them was saying one thing, the other one was saying like something else. And there was also something in there about like idols and things like that, and like, so even like in a joking way, they were kind of like making it as if like this whole Emmy ceremony was, so that people could kind of like bow down to, these idols that were people and that kind of thing. And then he goes on to kind of talk about other types of symbolism, not necessarily like that was just kind of an example he gave, but then he goes into these examples that were symbols. He starts talking about a lot of the logos of these different companies, right? So one, he's not saying specifically that absolutely all of these different logos have some kind of like connotation about Satanism or demons or anything like that, but that so many of them are strikingly similar to a point that it doesn't really fully like make sense. That why would they have to choose this logo, you know? I came across something different that has nothing to do with this Scott guy who was talking about all these different topics. There was another like, because I was researching a lot of this type of stuff, and then it started coming up like different logos of companies and things like this, and like something popular like Starbucks, you know, you can even look it up. So there's Starbucks that has this logo, and like the evolution of the logo of the Starbucks logo, the way it looks now with the lady with the hair, and then it basically what you see on the sides is a fin, like a fin. But the older logo used to look like this lady that was like a mermaid type of woman with her hair on both sides of her, breast showing, you know, where the hair was long and everything, and then the fin that was split was like almost like, you know, how women might like open their legs, but like it was a split fin that had one side of the fin up to the left and one side of the fin up to the right, and that's what you see as those little wavy lines, those little scales. And they were saying that like the making of this logo, why they chose this one, is because it was a representation of this goddess that was to entice people who worked in the sea. It would entice fishermen and people who worked out there to like come to them, and they weren't able to like resist it. Kind of like the idea of coffee, and you know, because coffee is irresistible, but specifically this brand of Starbucks for a lot of people is like irresistible. In general, people are very loyal towards Starbucks brand, even though they honestly don't have the best coffee, but I'd say they have it's the easiest to find, and it's the easiest to find. They have a lot of options, and honestly, they do sound like a decent company. A lot of people who work for them tend to like it, but just things like that, like the symbolism. And so this guy wasn't talking about Starbucks, but he was talking about kind of an idea similar to that one, that's like, you know, why do so many of these like movie company, entertainment company logos have some kind of similarity to certain symbols that you find in like Satanism and demon kind of related things. And, you know, I'm not against Satanists. Like, I've got nothing against Satanists, you know. To my knowledge, none of them have ever done anything to me. It's a different way of thinking. I know people who were raised Christian are usually taught, you know, about, you know, not really liking, you know, people who worship Satan and things like that. But it's like, they're humans too. And, like, why would they, you know, I feel like people worship what they worship because it works for them. And so if somebody wants to worship Satan, who am I to say don't do it? You know, I think Satanists have values. They're not just like running around murdering and killing people. Like, they believe in themselves and they have values. Like, they don't necessarily seem like they're out there to harm everybody or anything like that. That's not necessarily their role or their goal. It doesn't seem like, from what I understand and from what I've studied and what I've heard about when certain Satanists speak. Now, I'm not talking about like some crazed person that's like out there that just happens to be a Satanist, that's some kind of weird extremist that's like, you know, blathering on and on about like some weird thing, you know, about like kill everybody or whatever. Like, nothing like that. And There are people like that in Christianity too, that believe in like taking away, other people's human rights and, killing others, for your own gain and all this kind of stuff. Like, there's always going to be extremist places, but I don't see Satanism necessarily, like the people who are Satanists don't necessarily seem to be like all for like killing and, manipulating others and like abusing others. You find those people everywhere. Like, it doesn't necessarily mean that just because they call themselves a Satanist that they're a bad person morally. They just have a different belief system where they believe that Satan is who they would choose to call on and to worship, for whatever reasons they have. But I don't think Satanists as human beings are bad people. So I don't want it to sound like I'm talking against Satanist people. I'm talking about the manipulation of the entertainment industry that is attempting to get people connected to, in any way connected to like Satan and demons on its own. And now even, I don't even need to let go here, but even like the idea of like Satan as in a Lucifer Satan, and the idea of like demons, those types of concepts can be a little shaky themselves. When you study Lucifer and Satan, just study it, see what comes up. It's not all like the concept of hell like a lot of Christians were taught. It's not the same exact thing. There is some questioning if, it was kind of misinterpreted somewhere to make people more fearful, that there's some kind of evil thing out there that if you don't do what these people tell you to do, you're going to basically, end up in eternal fire, like, and Satan's there and that's his home. I don't know. That's, so even thinking that, but I'm just saying, like, there does seem to be a lot of legitimately interesting trends where you see a lot of demon and Satan related symbolism coming up in a lot of these things. So the first example he uses is DC, like the comics, like DC, Marvel, like that kind of thing. And it talks about the symbol. So basically the symbol for DC is the letters DC, and it has a crescent moon and a star. And so they say that the star, when you see the crescent moon and the star is to the left, that's supposed to be the symbol for white witchcraft. When you see the crescent moon and the star to the right, that's supposed to be the symbol for Satanism. And DC uses that symbol. They use the crescent moon and the star to the right. And so that's the first example he gives. And did they know they were doing it? Were they doing it on purpose? It looks like a variation of it, obviously, like it's blue and white and has all these different like fancy kind of like metallic looking like shadow effects to it and stuff. Like it doesn't look like so obviously like it, but if Starbucks uses some weird thing and then DC Comics or DC is using something else related to some kind of Satan related thing, that's already interesting in itself. That's already pretty interesting. And so when he goes and he looks at a couple others. He looks at Phoenix Pictures. So he says that, Phoenix Pictures, it shows like a little, it's not super clear, but basically, if you know what you're looking at, it's basically a phoenix that's like shown as like rising from the ashes. And that symbol, not necessarily their company symbol, but the symbol of a phoenix rising from the ashes is supposedly the symbol of what's called fire and divinity. And there's this other symbol of if you look at the legendary pictures symbol, so that company uses what's called the Celtic knot. It's the same thing. If you look at them side by side, it's the same exact thing. It's a Celtic knot, and it's like exactly the Celtic knot. And it basically, it says that the Celtic knot is associated with protective spells, invoking the gods of the four corners of the earth. And so those are some examples he gave. So he goes into talking about the Columbia Pictures, TriStar in Columbia, that symbol that you see is the goddess of Columbia, and he had previously thought it was Athena, but he saw it was the goddess of Columbia. Someone else had corrected him on that, and basically you can look that one up, and it's basically a lady holding a torch, and they say that the torch in the occult signifies the symbol of Lucifer, and that is a very important symbol that you see. And then there's this quote from occultist. I don't know what this says. It's too blurry. Occultist Edward Shearer. So someone who is an occultist, and I believe it's from a book called Mystery Mark of the New Age, and they cite a page number 240. It looks like that's all blurry for me, so it's hard to see. And it says the flaming torch is a symbol of Lucifer. Looking at this when you're talking about the goddess Columbia, who holds a flaming torch, and it says in quotes, Lucifer, having regained his star and his diadem, will assemble his legions for new works of creation. Attracted by his flaming torch, celestial spirits will descend. Then the torch of Lucifer will signal from heaven and earth, and the new age Christ will answer from earth to heaven. Do I understand what that means? No, I do not. It's a quote. I don't know. I've never read that book, Mystery Mark of the New Age. I don't know anything about New Age Christ. I know about Lucifer, but that is also one of those concepts that, is something to look into. For those of you that don't know, I think most Christian religions teach about Lucifer, other names coming up like the morning star, and that Lucifer was, that Lucifer is Satan, and Lucifer is the same as the serpent in the Garden of Eden, and that Lucifer, in some traditions, people believe that Lucifer was in heaven and misled a lot of angels to fall from heaven, to go against God and create a war against God, and they left and were kind of reigning on earth, kind of running wild, doing whatever they wanted. So, I mean, that just, I don't know, it just depends what your beliefs are with Lucifer, Satan, with the whole idea. I mean, if you're an occultist, you likely believe in Lucifer or Satan. If you are a Christian, you were likely raised with ideas surrounding Lucifer or Satan. I don't know a lot of Christians that don't believe in Satan. I know a lot of Christians that don't believe in hell. I don't know what I believe, honestly, on some of these things. I'm just putting information out there. People can study and make your own decisions. Like, I like to make topics as study topics, not necessarily as material to study what I say or what I'm talking about, but to take the concepts, and if they interest you, study for yourself about it and see what you learn about it. Because a lot of us, are taught a lot of things, and I've always liked to know, where did the traditions come from? Where do these beliefs come from? Why believe this and not that? And why do a lot of people call themselves maybe, a title of a certain religion, but everybody has all these different beliefs and different ways of doing things? I've always been fascinated in that. It's like, how come it never really looks the same? Maybe it's because humans are individuals and we all kind of do things a little bit differently, understand and see the world a little bit differently, so there's a lot of variation. But also there is a lot of weird stuff when it comes to like interpretation of ideas and concepts, from like the original texts and the original written languages, and then when you actually look at the history of the interpretation, it's like sometimes people just start saying that this means that, but then you look at the original and the commentary about the original text says certain things, and so there is some speculation as to if the morning star mentioned in the Bible is actually Lucifer, or if that's just a tradition that people are being taught that it translates to Lucifer, that's what it means. And since a lot of us don't speak those original languages, or if don't really know the cultural significance behind, even if you do read the words, if something else tells you this word translates into that phrase, and that phrase means this other person's name, I mean, you're not really gonna always argue with it. But then there are other scholars that say, like, no, like culturally, significance at that time, when people would see that original word written in that script originally, people would not translate it to mean Lucifer. They would translate it to mean some other guy, some other theoretical, person or something. And so, yeah, that kind of also kind of breaks down this whole argument of like, why would it even be important if if Scott is finding all this like symbolism about like Satan and Satanism and demons, but then like, if the Bible's already interpreting it incorrectly, then what the heck is it in the first place? But yeah. So alright, Scott continues to break things down. And yawning. He continues to break things down by reviewing kind of just this concept that a lot of movies have this theme of sorcery and this theme of kind of like spirituality topics. So he points out that the writers he says, he doesn't know if people are purposely using these symbols like the symbols that I was just mentioning that he talked about before with the logos and things, because there are others. It wasn't just the ones that he mentioned. And then, when it comes to certain other things, like he looks at an example with names, and definitions of names. These types of things oftentimes go right over our heads, right? So he talks about Superman. He talks a lot about these concepts of like themes that you see, of themes of Christ and Lucifer, or themes of like in a lot of comic books and superhero kind of movies based on comic books. So a lot of that kind of stuff, comic books, superheroes and comic books, and you basically get a like this theme that comes up over and over and over again of somebody in a cape, and he was talking about the concept of heroes. Like when you look up the definitions, it appears that a lot of times heroes are almost godlike, and he starts talking about Superman and the writers being Jewish, the two people who came up with it, and that he mentions that they're Jewish because there is some Hebrew in some of the names of the most popular people in that in the movie, in the comic. Just looking at the names, so Superman's name is Kal-El, which in Hebrew, Kal means all, and El means God. And so either that translating into either all God or all that is God or totally God, approximately. Now it's spelled Kal-El. In Hebrew, there's not a K, there's a Q. Yeah, there's a Q. There's a KH, like a cough. There's a letter cough. I guess maybe that would be closer to K, maybe, I guess. So maybe there is a K, actually. And then, he takes the names Clark Kent and Lex Luthor and looks at the meaning of the name Clark, which is like clergyman, or someone who's learned, like someone who's studied. And then he looks at the name Kent, which in Welsh, the name Kent means bright white. And then they say that other definitions for the word Kent is from the Kenites, which biblically would be descendants of Cain, from Genesis 15:19. So Cainites, in Hebrew, Cain is Kain, and spelled Qayin, according to like when you transliterate the Hebrew word. And then in Hebrew, Kenite is spelled Q. Did I say Q before? So Q for Cain, Qayin. For Kenites, Qayini. So Kayin and Kayini. When we spell it, we spell Cain, we spell Cain, Cain, and Kenites, Kenites. But that the biblical descendants are considered from descendants of Cain. And then the name Lex Luthor. So Lex is Latin for law. And he says, well, maybe if Lex is maybe short for Alexander, then Alexander means leader of men. There are a lot of Alexanders in history that were kings and things. And then Luther, famous warrior or famous in war. I can't read what that says. Teutonic or something like that. I can't read what it says, but and then like he mentioned also, okay, so Kal-El is Hebrew, Clark is Old English, Kent is Welsh, or from the Hebrew, Kent from possibly Kenites, and Cain. Cain, if you don't know that story, you know, in the Bible, Cain killed Abel, and then yeah, so you know, it was over God not accepting the offering that Cain gave, and he preferred the offering from Abel, and so Cain killed his brother Abel, and then he was basically, he had a mark on him that he was forced outside of the other people that were living there. He was no longer able to live anywhere other than by himself, and he had a mark on him, basically. It's an interesting story. Read it. I'm not gonna go into a whole story about Cain and Abel, because you know I'll get way distracted. So yeah, but yeah, Latin, and then for Lex, and then the you know, Luther, meaning, you know, from that I don't know, I can't read it. I think it says Teutonic. It looks like T-E something tonic. I just can't read what that third letter is. And then, yeah, he says maybe even possible Luther, like Martin Luther, but he's not sure about that. So yeah, that's just with that movie. So Scott makes this chart that he shows, and it basically has he puts on one side the character of Christ, on another side the character of Lucifer, and he kind of compares a lot of these superheroes and kind of like themes that you see with a lot of these superheroes. And you know, so talking about Christ, it says reveals his true identity versus Lucifer, who masks his true identity. A lot of these characters do, you know, kind of they're not like straightforward that character, right? There's usually like a human version of them that they present to the whole rest of the world. Everybody else sees this human side of them. Usually their closest friends are the most suspicious. There's somebody that's always a little bit suspicious because they're familiar with this human. They're familiar with the person. You know, I'm not very familiar with all the names, but, you know, you always see, like, someone that one of them has, like, a crush on, like, the neighbor or the bestie, or, you know, their school crush, or, you know, like, their childhood sweetheart kind of always kind of knows them the best. And, you know, however this hero gets its power, because, you know, it seems like most of them aren't necessarily like born with the power, like they get it some way, either being bitten by a radioactive spider or something, like they get the power in some manner or another. And, you know, they're usually hiding this identity of like having this power, but their best friend kind of usually starts like noticing these weird little like, oh, why do you have like this, why are you wearing those glasses, or where are your glasses, or like why do you have this weird like makeup on part of your body or something, or like why do you have this like item, like a cape or something that they like find, or like this ring or something, like what's that, you know, like they pick up on the cues of weird stuff. So I kind of like that. I like that comparison. And the other comparison that I like is you know, with Christ, the power comes from God. With Lucifer, the power comes from self. That's another comparison that I liked. The other two comparisons are kind of like a little less obvious. They're more vague, but yeah, like it says Christ never changing, Lucifer, let's say dual. So Lucifer dual or multiple identities. Christ not beautiful in physical form. Lucifer masks himself with physical beauty. And the last one, Christ turns the other cheek, and Lucifer bent on revenge. So those are kind of like not as strong, I don't think, as when you're comparing like to superheroes, but yeah, that was that part that he went into. And then so I think the last part I want to talk about, it's not the last thing he talks about, but the last thing I want to talk about is kind of like my own kind of recent experiences with just media in general. Like, I have a lot of respect for the Bible, you know. I have a lot of respect for a lot of things, and I just really like ancient works of literature and ancient ideas about living life and things like that, like from any culture. But like I've mentioned before, like I was raised in a Christian Adventist culture, so of course the majority of what I know is definitely from that culture. And then second to that, maybe like from other cultures that have like some similarities, like about the Sabbath or like learning and things like that. Like I know what I know because that's kind of what I study. I study a lot because I have fun studying it, but I don't really do much with it other than talk about it on here or talk about it with friends and family. I like to kind of bounce ideas off of people, and I don't really do it to like share that I think I'm correct and that everybody else is wrong, or that, you know, to try to sway somebody to believe things. I think my main goal usually is to just throw ideas out there that a lot of us have questions about, or that a lot of us kind of have like oh, okay, like there's this one thing that like gets mentioned and like nobody ever says anything about it, like in the Bible, how it mentions Nephilim, and it's like that doesn't come up very often, but then there's not really an explanation about what it is, and then it turns out to be this whole concept potentially that, you know, you were never really taught about, and it's just easy to just gloss over things. And I feel like it's interesting, like in school, a lot of us were raised, you know, going to English class, and there's a certain portion where you get, you know, instead of reading just like the English text, the textbook for your reading or English class, you start reading books and talking about books and interpreting books. Like we have this in our culture where we are a very book heavy culture. We're not a culture very heavy on like oral tradition of like hearing stories. We're a culture that's very you know, you learn to read, write, spell early, and that's one of our major forms of learning is through books. We read books, right? And we listen to lectures. We read books, and we take that information and we use it for usually a test, if not just for, you know, interest and knowledge. And, you know, religion is kind of set up the same way in our culture where, you know, you're told to read this book, you know, that most of us don't really read. A lot of people aren't very well versed in it, but a lot of people were raised in these religions that have these texts, that have these books, that have these stories. The difference that you really see in Christianity that you don't see so much in Islam and Judaism is that Christians don't really tend as a whole to necessarily learn and study the Bible outside of the lecture type of, you know, sermon, which is someone else teaching you what your denomination believes in those traditions, and they interpret this book through that lens. It's not like when you go to class and you're doing algebra 2 or something, and like you're literally like, you listen to the lecture, you do it, you practice it, you know. if you need to later on, maybe when you build a garden or something, or do some landscaping in your own house, you might use some geometry and algebra to kind of, figure out like how many bricks you need or what bricks you need, or like measurements of certain things. You might use it in certain fields, but in a lot of fields you might not use a lot of the skills you use from a lot of the classes, and some skills you will use. And being at, in a religion where you're at a church and things like that, like usually there's learning involved. And then you're usually supposed to take that information and do something with it. Usually do what that church teaches you that your people from that denomination are doing, because you're supposed to, because that's the most accurate way to live your life. And not only is it the most accurate way to live your life, but there's sometimes a scare tactic attached to that if you don't do that version of their interpretation of what this book says, then you will go to hell, and burn eternally in a fire. Anyways, I wasn't really trying to go too much into that direction, but that is generally what you see in a lot of Western culture. Christianity does have like this difference. Like a lot of us, Catholics, I believe a lot of Catholics who go to Catholic school learn Latin. At least the friends that I had, a lot of them learned Latin in school. It is a very good language to learn. I'm not knocking it, but a lot of other types of Christians, unless you're maybe like Greek Orthodox or like some other type of religion that has like another kind of culture base tied to it. If most Protestant Christians don't learn any other language other than English, and usually you learn the easiest Bible version that you can explain. When you read it, you just want to read it, and it's usually written in English, and you don't usually get like the King James Bible, but you might, and you don't usually get the original Hebrew text or Aramaic or Greek. You don't usually get like the originals. You usually get a version that someone else interpreted to English, and then not only did they interpret it, they made it easier to understand. That's very common, and I'm not saying that there's anything more right with other people who do it one way or another. I'm just saying, like, that's very common, that a lot of Christians don't really know the Bible because they don't read it and they don't study it, and it seems very uninteresting to study. But one thing that I liked when I went to college is I went to a lot of public colleges. I didn't go to any religious colleges. But I definitely was around a lot of theology majors and things like that. But, I always had this, studying kind of nature about myself anyway. So, I was always around Bibles, and so I read them because people talked about them all the time, or they said that what they were talking about was in there. And it didn't take long before I started realizing that some of the stuff people say and some of the stuff that's in there are not the same things, even if you don't really know a lot about it. And one of the things that Scott talks about is what is it? He talks about, I was going to talk about my own personal experience, but just the last thing he said was about the story, the nativity. He says that was the only, at least at that time, I don't know from now, but at that time that was the only movie to have ever premiered at the Vatican. And then he goes into talking about the story of the nativity in this movie, and the interview that he watched, like a whole long interview of an hour long of the lady who plays Mary, and that pretty much the whole movie about the nativity is mostly about Mary and does not talk about, Jesus as God and the Savior of the world. It doesn't talk about that. It just has a story about Mary, and also it's a fictional story. And that was kind of a point that for me kind of came full circle. So, let's see. Sorry, I'm trying to go onto my Netflix. Yeah, guys, I can talk to you about movies and like stuff like that all day. You know, I watch movies, I watch shows. I'm not so interested in shows as I am in movies, but I mostly like comedy, stand-up comedy. I'm getting into a lot of like comedic kind of podcasts, like podcasts that are like kind of people interviewing different types of people, but some of it's funny or some of it's educational. I'm really into that kind of stuff. That's probably the majority of the content I consume. And then a lot of times I rewatch sitcoms that I've seen before, like Moesha and Sister Sister and that kind of thing. And then I like to rewatch movies that I've seen before. And I also like to watch new movies, but usually nothing too intensive because my life gets intense because of work already. But there are a lot of good series out there that I like. I find them entertaining and great. You know, I really like Game of Thrones, even though I haven't finished it. I think it's very well made. I like some funny stuff like F is for Family. I like that Cobra Kai series. There's a lot of like Netflix original stuff that I do kind of like. But one thing that I was interested to talk about that I can't recall if I ever brought up before, sorry, I'm very trying to sorry, I'm trying to remember what I was gonna say. So one thing that I noticed, which I believe has changed in my lifetime, and I feel like I'm like blanking in my memory, but I do feel like there was a time when I would type in the names of these like Bible stories, like these Bible, character stories, like when you watch like, a lot of people growing up, probably around Easter or something, or Christmas, if your family was kind of a little bit religious, probably would rent or buy movies about these Bible stories, right? Because usually you don't see those on TV, and sometimes you might see them on TV, especially around like Christmas and Easter. But they have movies like Paul and Jesus and Peter and Mary and Joseph, and stories, in the stories, basically, like the Prince of Egypt, stuff like that, right? Where Moses, like you have all these stories. And it wasn't that long ago that I was kind of like getting more interested in like Sabbath traditions and like just kind of like reverting to a lot of things that I used to practice or kind of like enjoy. They helped me balance out my week more. And I started thinking about like, during the Sabbath, I used to like to watch like movies from like Bible stories, like, and I'm not saying everything's 100% accurate from what the Bible says, or I mean, even different Bibles, there's speculation if they're even accurate or whatever, so like whatever. But I used to like the Bible stories about certain people in the Bible, or like the story as it's written in the Bible, but then they're like acting it out, right? And it wasn't long ago that I started searching, and I noticed, I was like, there isn't a Bible story anymore. So there's a difference between a story in the Bible that goes start to finish, right? So think about this, a story in the Bible that goes start to finish when you read it. And then there's the story in action form. They get actors, and each actor is playing a role of a of a character in the story, and it goes from start to finish in order. The whole story settings and everything are in the order of the story that it is in the Bible. You see this a lot with other types of literature too, like even something as simple as Romeo and Juliet. There are plenty of, there's a book, which is a play, and then there are actual plays of it or movies of it, just as the play is written. And it's a classic for sure. I mean, and a lot of Bible stories are kind of classics too. And so it's kind of interesting that on Netflix, when you search for any kind of Bible story, they don't have any of those. The ones that actually follow the story of the Bible. The only ones that they have are like fictional ones, right? So Mary Magdalene, there's not a lot about her in the Bible. Like she's mentioned, and there's a lot about like the archaeologists and historians, talk a lot about Mary Magdalene and like maybe where they think she probably came from and like her kind of role outside of what's written in the Bible, like kind of what her life would have looked like and stuff like that. All of that's not written in the Bible. That's all like historical related type of stuff. And so there's this story that's her, that's one of the stories. But again, this isn't a Bible story because there isn't a story of Mary Magdalene in the Bible necessarily. Like she shows up as a character, but there's no like, other than the few times that she's mentioned, she's definitely a major character, but a majorly important character, but she's not like Paul, how she's got like books written that she wrote and stuff, and that like she had a lot of roles, like you don't really see full-on stories of Mary Magdalene in the Bible. You just see like her popping in here and there, and then other speculation of where she may have been at certain times where it's not maybe directly mentioned. There's another movie called The Young Messiah. That's also not a Bible story. There's a lot of like fiction in there that they kind of fill in a lot of information that's about Jesus as a youth. There's plenty of movies like that are like fictional, but it's just a little curious to me that for years, it was so easy to just search up like a Bible story on like those types of movie sites. It wasn't hard to find. They had so many of them, and now you can't find any of them. It's not like there's one, like there's zero. I don't know if you guys have seen that movie Noah. If you're interested in that kind of thing, like Noah is free right now on YouTube. At least it is at the time I'm recording this. It has I shouldn't even have attempted to try to say his name because now I can't remember. It's on the tip of my tongue and I can't even think about it. He was the guy in A Beautiful Mind. Dang. How do I have to look this up? Can you tell how exhausted I am if I literally have to look this up? Like, what the heck? I watched a lot of it recently, too. Russell Crowe. It also has Emma Watson. The one, Hermione from Harry Potter. And, yeah. So, anyways, I just found that interesting that I was like, like, why can't I find any of these stories? But for those of you that like fictional, I like the fictional Bible stories, actually, especially because I grew up and spent so much time reading the Bible. It's, kind of cool to see a version of it that I never thought about or never heard about, or it's just like an offshoot of a story. It kind of expands on it in some ways, especially because a lot of these stories I know pretty well, at least did at one point in time. It's kind of easy for me to like spot stuff that's like just, total creativity just put in there. I mean, I appreciate it for what it is. I like the art of it. I don't really know a lot of this kind of symbolism and stuff, but it really fascinates me. I think it's very interesting to think about, the stuff that we consume in more detail, and also the people producing the material, kind of like their role in things, and maybe how they put, a lot more thought into these things than maybe some of us think they do. Even from things like choosing a name like Lex Luthor or like Clark Kent, and just like different kind of ideas like that, or like different logos that like mean different things about like ancient deities and stuff like that. And it's very interesting, to say the least, that there's more to the story. Sometimes it's like there's more background to a lot of this stuff. It's not just like what we see on the surface. But a lot of times it's interesting, right? Because you'll watch a movie and you'll be like, that is so deep. And it's already just deep just watching it. And then you can dive into these ideas and start looking up characters' names and logos and this and that. And like all the kind of intricacies behind the story and what inspired it and everything. And kind of like different symbols that are popping out here and there. Just symbols are a fascinating thing. The concept of like, is this brainwashing of some form? Is it some kind of like mass manipulation of like mass international manipulation of ideas and like values and thoughts based on, some kind of agenda from Hollywood? Is it just coincidence? Is it all completely just some big flawed mess, and what you look for you will find? What is it? Like, is there significance to it or not? So, I mean, those are the questions I like. I don't really care if it's right or wrong. I don't really care who says what about what or whatever. Like, I just find those main ideas just captivating with everything that has to do with like religion, spirituality, and then people taking these topics and putting like a creative, like something as deep as religion. Like most of these major religions are very well like thought out, indoctrinated with like a purpose. Like there was somebody at a certain time period that had some agenda with some of this stuff. So it seems. That's potential. That's potentially why there's a lot of discrepancies, is because there's some agenda coming from some place. None of us can predict someone else's agenda necessarily, or really say if like what if they really knew the manipulation they were trying to do, or did it all just happen to be some kind of weird coincidence. A lot of us can't really say, but I just really like the concepts of it. I'm not here to say anything against like people who worship idols, or people who worship multiple gods, or people who have all these different types of deities, or people who are Satanists, or any of this kind of stuff. Like I don't really, I try not to really have a lot against people, if they're just living their life and letting everybody else kind of just comfortably live their lives, and they're not harassing others. I don't really care what they call themselves or what they believe, or to me it's more like, what do you do with what you believe and how are you acting with it? I don't really care anything about like what you say you are or aren't. As long as you're not getting in anybody else's way, I don't think you're doing anything wrong. Ultimately, all these little details when things come down to people's perspectives and faith, and I don't know what's right or wrong. I just like it all. I like to think about it, and learn about it, and I like to question a lot of stuff. I'm really interested in philosophy too in general. Like I haven't studied it in a long time, but just like Greek philosophy, that kind of stuff. Like I really like that kind of stuff too. Like Roman history, the history of like different kings and their nations and their connection to religion and stuff like that. Like, I've never been raised in a country that had a national religion. Like definitely our nation that we live in after it was formed into what it is now by taking over a lot of other people's stuff. Now, there's a culture in charge that is kind of, using a lot of Christian belief background for a lot of the lawmaking and a lot of, different political propositions and things. They definitely do use Christianity to talk about what is abortion illegal or not, is this or that, being able to bear arms, is freedom of speech, or gay marriage and things like this. There's a lot of topics that they take and just kind of decide that this is either right or wrong because of what the Bible says. It usually comes back to what the Bible says, and a lot of people might not know what the Bible says. I don't think I really know what it says. I know what I have learned about it. I've spent a lot of time with it, and I know what I have learned and what I've been taught and what I have studied. And that is what I think about everything. That's all I really think. I'm not really gonna sit here and try to tell people do or don't do this thing because it's right or wrong. I've talked about what I believe, and I really truly believe that, and I try not to be prejudiced against people, and I fail at it sometimes, but I really don't hate Satanists. I really don't hate paganists. I just find it fascinating how much it comes up when you look for it. It's it's such a subtle culture, which is interesting because Christianity is such a loud culture. It's so everybody, here we are, and this is what we say. And not only will we tell you everything, show you everything about what we believe, we will go and try to make you one of us. It's a lot, and I find it interesting that you see the prevalence of the other cultures. They pop up a lot, but they're not as loud. I don't know anybody who's on national TV that identifies as a paganist. There aren't that many Satanists that I know of that are overtly Satanists, or people in the occult, or different things like that. There are people who kind of vaguely talk about it, but most people in the public eye, as far as Hollywood celebrities and whatnot, they don't really tend to talk much about their religion too much, from what I've noticed, other than the Christians and sometimes Jewish people. You'll hear about who's Jewish. Usually you don't really hear too much about their faith or their spiritual practices. Sometimes you might, when Madonna was studying Kabbalah or something like that. I don't know if she really was, but I know that was a topic, Jewish mysticism and things like that. You kind of hear about it, but yeah, I think Christians are by far the loudest group, and it's just kind of interesting to just see all this kind of stuff related to Christianity all in the media, and then all all the stuff kind of also in the background of it. You do see paganism and Satanism and how often it does pop up in our culture, but how subtle it is. That it alone just really interests me. It really interests me. I never really thought about that either, that I don't really know anyone who claims themselves as Satan or paganist necessarily. There are some, I know there are some that are Satanists that are out there in the public eye, but I think also they're just not, there's no one I can just think of, an athlete or something like that off the top of my head, but I know there are some people in Hollywood. I just don't know specifically, their names, and they're not really loud about it. You don't even hardly see movies about Satanists or anything like that. It's really hard to find a lot of direct content about those thoughts. But then it's interesting that there are undertones in it mixed in with all this other like Christian stuff. That's the theme that keeps popping up. It's like Satanism and paganism, and then Christianity. Like those themes do pop up very close together very, very often, and I just find it just fascinating. Like it's a really cool, interesting fact just about the power of media in general and symbolism. I'm rambling and I'm hungry and I want to go eat dinner, so I don't know. I hope this was fun. This was one of my favorite episodes to make because it's one of those topics that just kind of like, I feel like is very relatable for a lot of people who consume a lot of like movies and television and stuff. It's a topic where it's like people might not even notice this stuff is in there, and it's just interesting that how hidden it can be. That interests me a lot. So all right, I'm done.